Morning, my son-in-law stood on my front lawn in Oakville and told me I had 48 hours to get out of my own house. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the door. I just looked at him, really looked at him, and thought about the 31 years I'd spent building what he was trying to take. His name was Declan. He'd married my daughter Fiona 9 years earlier in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside Niagara-on-the-Lake, and I'd paid for every table, every bottle, every flower arrangement. I remember standing at the edge of the dance floor that night, watching him spin her around, thinking, good, she's happy. That's all I ever wanted. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. Let me back up. My name is Edward Marsh. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a senior actuary at one of the largest insurance firms in Toronto, which means I spent my entire career doing one thing, calculating risk. Probability tables, liability exposure, the mathematical likelihood of things going wrong. The irony isn't lost on me. After I retired 3 years ago, I moved into the house my wife Lorraine and I had bought in 1997, a red brick 2-story on a quiet crescent in Oakville, about 40 minutes west of Toronto. Lorraine passed in 2019. Pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. The speed of it still knocks the breath out of me when I think about it. After she died, it was just me in that house, and Fiona, who called every Sunday and visited on holidays, and Declan, who came along for the visits but spent most of them on his phone. I should have paid more attention to the phone. About 14 months ago, I slipped on ice coming down my back steps. Nothing catastrophic. Fractured my wrist, bruised 2 ribs, badly shook my confidence. I was in Oakville Trafalgar Memorial for 2 nights. Fiona drove down from Mississauga and stayed with me the first week, which I appreciated more than I said. Declan came the second day with a folder of papers. Dad, he said. He'd always called me Dad, which I'd always found a little eager. Fiona and I have been talking. You're 63, you're alone. You had a fall. You need someone looking out for you financially, just in case something more serious happens. I told him I was fine. My accounts were organized. I had a financial advisor I'd worked with for 12 years, a woman named Beverly at a wealth management office in Burlington. Everything was in order. He nodded like I hadn't spoken. We're just talking about a power of attorney. It protects you. It means if you're ever incapacitated, Fiona can handle things without going to court. Which was true. It was a reasonable thing to have in place. I wasn't opposed to the idea. I was opposed to the folder of papers appearing 48 hours after my fall, while I still had ice on my ribs. Let me look them over, I said. He left the folder. I looked them over, and then I called Beverly. Beverly had a sharp mind and 30 years in financial services, and she called me back within the hour. Edward, she said, the documents give Fiona authority over your investment accounts, your property, and your RRSP holdings. The wording here is unusually broad. Who drafted these? I told her I wasn't sure. The law firm name on the letterhead was one I didn't recognize, a small office in Etobicoke. Before you sign anything, she said, talk to your own lawyer, not theirs. I thanked her and set the folder aside. I never signed it. 2 weeks later, Fiona called and asked if I'd had a chance to look at the documents. I told her I was still thinking about it. She sounded rehearsed when she answered, like she'd been told what to say. I noticed that. I filed it away. Over the next few months, small things started to shift. Declan began dropping by the house more often, sometimes without Fiona. He had opinions about the property. This place is worth a lot, Dad, more than you probably realize, and questions about whether I'd thought about downsizing. He mentioned a condo development near the Clarkson Joe station twice. He asked once, casually, whether I'd updated my will after Lorraine passed. I told him I had. What I didn't tell him was that I'd also started keeping notes, dates, times, exact quotes. 31 years of actuarial work had made me precise about documentation without thinking about it. I kept a small notebook in the drawer of my desk, and after each visit I wrote down what was said. Old habit. I didn't know yet how much I'd need it. In February, I got a letter from a law office I'd never contacted, informing me that a change of beneficiary had been filed on one of my investment accounts. a non-registered account with just under $200,000 in it, and that the new beneficiary on record was Fiona Margaret Calloway, née Marsh. I sat with that letter for a long time. Then I called Beverly, and she confirmed it. Someone had submitted paperwork to the financial institution, apparently with a copy of a power of attorney document showing my signature. A power of attorney I had never signed. I want to be careful about what I say here, because I know how this sounds. My daughter, my only child, the girl I coached through high school math, drove to skating practice at 6 in the morning, sat beside in the hospital when she had her appendix out at 22. I didn't want to believe it, but I also knew what the document said, and I knew my own signature. I called my lawyer, a man I'd worked with for over a decade named Gordon Fitch, out of an office in downtown Oakville, and told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Edward, what you're describing is fraud." He said it simply, not dramatically, just as a fact. "I know," I said. "Do you want to pursue this?" I thought about Fiona. I thought about Lorraine, who had loved our daughter so completely and so without condition that she would have forgiven almost anything. I thought about what Lorraine would say to me right now if she were sitting across the table. She would say, "The truth matters, even when it hurts." Yes, I told Gordon, I want to pursue this. Gordon's first move was to contact the financial institution and flag the account as disputed. The beneficiary change was frozen pending investigation. He also sent a formal letter to the law firm in Etobicoke requesting the original power of attorney documentation, the copy on file with the institution, the notarization records, everything. What came back was illuminating. The notary who'd allegedly witnessed my signature was a man who worked out of a shared office space in Mississauga. Gordon requested his appointment records for the date in question. There was no record of a client meeting, no record of my name. The notarization had been fabricated. In Ontario, a notary who certifies a document without the signatory present isn't just making a paperwork error. That's a serious professional offense, potentially criminal. Gordon brought this to the attention of the Law Society of Ontario, and then we waited. I didn't tell Fiona what I knew. I kept taking her Sunday calls. I kept answering politely when Declan texted to ask how I was settling in after the winter. I even had them over for dinner in March. Ribs from the butcher on Kerr Street, the kind Fiona had loved since she was a teenager. We sat at the same table where I'd helped her with her university applications. We talked about nothing. I was calm the whole time. 31 years of sitting across from executives who wanted me to validate their optimistic risk models had given me a particular kind of patience. The notebook in my desk was getting thicker. The morning, Declan appeared on my lawn with the eviction notice. It was a Thursday in April. 6:53 in the morning. I know because I'd been up since 5. I've been an early riser since my working years, and I was on my second coffee when I heard the car in the driveway. I looked out the kitchen window and saw him standing on the front walk with a man I didn't recognize, who turned out to be a process server from a bailiff company in Hamilton. There was a document. It claimed that pursuant to a property transfer registered with the Land Registry Office in Halton Region, the house at my address was no longer in my name, and that I was required to vacate within 48 hours. My daughter's name was on the transfer document, and Declan's. I opened the front door before they could knock. The process server handed me the papers with the flat professional courtesy of a man who serves documents for a living and tries not to think too hard about what they contain. Declan stood behind him with his hands in the pockets of his jacket, and he was smiling. Not a small, uncomfortable smile, a wide one. Satisfied. "Sorry it came to this, Dad," he said, and he didn't sound sorry at all. I looked at the documents for about 15 seconds. I'd read enough legal and financial paperwork in my career to understand what I was looking at. I looked up at the process server. Young man, probably mid-20s, clearly uncertain about his role in whatever this was. And I asked him one question. "Do you know what a fraudulent land transfer carries under the Criminal Code of Canada?" He blinked. Declan's smile got slightly smaller. "Because this document," I said, "references a power of attorney that was fabricated. The notary has already been reported to the Law Society. The financial institution has already frozen the affected account. and my lawyer filed an application with the Ontario Superior Court 3 weeks ago to void this transfer on the grounds of fraud. I looked at Declan. The hearing is in 11 days. The process server looked at Declan. Declan looked at me. I handed the papers back to the process server. I'd suggest, I said, that your client speak to a criminal defense lawyer before the end of today. Then I went back inside and finished my coffee. I'm not going to pretend that moment felt the way it looks in the retelling. Standing at my own front door, holding papers that said I didn't own my home, with my son-in-law smiling at me from my own lawn. There was nothing clean about it. I was 63 years old, and my daughter had tried to take my house. That knowledge sits in a place in your chest that doesn't go away just because the legal situation resolves, and it did resolve, fully and completely, in ways that still feel slightly unreal to me. The Ontario Superior Court hearing was 11 days later at Osgood Hall in Toronto. Gordon had assembled a clear and well-documented case. The fabricated power of attorney, the notary's falsified records, the financial account change, the fraudulent land transfer, the judge. A woman in her mid-50s who had the efficient manner of someone who had seen every variation of family financial fraud in her career, reviewed the materials and voided the land transfer within the hearing. The property reverted to my name that afternoon. The notary lost his certification. The Law Society proceedings were still ongoing as of the last update I received. Declan was charged under Section 380 of the Criminal Code, fraud over $5,000. The Crown also pursued charges related to the fabricated POA documentation. His lawyer negotiated, but there wasn't much to negotiate with. The evidence was thorough. Fiona, this is the part I still don't know how to write. She wasn't in the courtroom. She didn't attend the hearing. Her lawyer filed a statement indicating she had been unaware of the specific methods Declan had used, that she had believed the power of attorney was legitimate. I don't know, sitting here now, how much of that to believe. The judge noted that her name was on the land transfer and that the question of her knowledge and participation was a matter for separate proceedings. Those proceedings happened. I was not at liberty to attend. What I know is that Fiona received a conditional discharge, no criminal record, provided she completed 200 hours of community service and attended financial counseling. Her marriage to Declan was over before the summer. She called me in August. She called from a number I didn't recognize, and when I answered, she said, "Dad, it's me." And then she cried for a long time before she could say anything else. I listened. I didn't hang up. I'm not telling this part because it ended cleanly. It didn't. I don't know what my relationship with my daughter is now. Something bruised and careful and still alive, the way a tree can survive a hard winter and still not look quite right in the spring. We talk. Not every Sunday anymore. Maybe twice a month. She's renting a place in Hamilton and working at a physiotherapy clinic. She sends me things sometimes, articles she thinks I'd find interesting, a photograph of the lake near her apartment. I save the photographs. The house on the Crescent in Oakville still has the same red brick, the same back steps I fell on, now with a proper non-slip mat that Beverly sent me as a get-well gift. I updated my will with Gordon shortly after the hearing. Real documentation, properly witnessed, the way it was always supposed to be done. Beverly and I still talk every quarter about the accounts. The beneficiary designation on the non-registered account now goes to a hospice in Mississauga that cared for Lorraine in her last 2 weeks. That felt right. I think about Lorraine more than I tell people. I think she would understand the part about keeping the photographs. She always said that loving someone and holding them accountable weren't opposites, that in fact you couldn't really do one without the other. I've been retired for 3 years now. I walk most mornings along the lakeshore path, the long one that takes about an hour if you don't rush. I don't rush anymore. I spent 31 years calculating the probability of things going wrong. What I never modeled, because you can't put it in a table, is the specific weight of sitting at your own kitchen table with your second cup of coffee on a Thursday morning in April, reading a document that says your home isn't yours, and knowing, with complete certainty, that the person who tried to take it had made a very precise mistake. They'd forgotten what I did for a living. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over you after something like this. Not peace exactly, but the specific stillness that comes when the noise finally stops and you're left standing in your own kitchen, in your own house, holding a cup of coffee that's gone slightly cold. I think about the sequence of events a lot. Not obsessively. but the way you turn a stone over in your hand when you're walking, almost without meaning to. What strikes me most isn't the fraud itself. It's the assumption behind it. Declan and, to whatever degree, Fiona had looked at a 63-year-old man living alone in a house in Oakville and calculated that he could be taken advantage of. That age plus solitude plus grief equaled vulnerability. That I wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight back or wouldn't know how. That calculation was the first mistake. And it wasn't a small one. I spent 31 years measuring risk for a living. I know what it costs to underestimate a variable. What Declan didn't account for was that the habits you build over a career don't retire when you do. The precision, the documentation, the discipline of paying attention to exactly what's in front of you, rather than what you wish were there. When he handed me that folder in the hospital, he saw a grieving father with a broken wrist. I saw a set of documents with unusually broad wording and a law firm I didn't recognize. Those are two very different things to see. I also think about integrity, not as an abstract value, but as something structural. Beverly flagged the documents within an hour of my call because she'd spent 30 years doing her job honestly, which meant she knew immediately when something wasn't right. Gordon pursued the case methodically because that's what a good lawyer does, full stop. The notary who falsified records lost his certification because the system, imperfect as it is, still has mechanisms that function when people use them honestly. Every outcome in the story traces back to whether someone chose to do the right thing when it would have been easier not to. That's not fate. That's just cause and effect, played out over time. What I keep coming back to, sitting with all of it, is that you don't get through something like this on emotion alone. Grief is real. Betrayal is real. The particular ache of recognizing that someone you raised and loved was willing to sign their name to your dispossession. That doesn't go away over a weekend. What carries you through is something quieter and more durable. The willingness to keep your head clear when everything in you wants to either collapse or retaliate. To document instead of react. To call Beverly instead of calling Fiona in a fury. To sit across a dinner table in March and pass the ribs and say nothing, because the right moment hadn't come yet. Fiona sends photographs of the lake near her apartment. I save them. I'm not sure what that means yet. Whether it's the beginning of something repaired or just the evidence that love is more stubborn than sense. Maybe both. What I know is that I still walk the lakeshore path most mornings. I don't rush. The red brick house is still mine, and the people who tried to take it are living with the consequences of having believed that getting older makes you someone who can be outmaneuvered. It doesn't. It just means you've had more time to learn exactly how things work.